Mark.
Dumping LN2, starting flight pressurization.
All meters are covering.
How the tanks look, Jack?
Look good.
Ready to start.
Ready to start. Minus 10 seconds.
In the middle of the 20th century, for the first time in history, man reached beyond his planet and began to probe the mysteries of space.
Well, in the case of SpaceX, I just kept wondering why we were not making progress towards sending people to Mars, why we didn't have a base on the moon. Where are the sort of space hotels that were promised in 2001, the movie? It's like, it's
This is one of the tools with which man is creating a new age. But the age of space is also the latest chapter in a story as old as man himself.
It just wasn't happening year after year. It was getting me down. I look at the NASA website, I was like, where does it say when we're going to Mars? It doesn't. So initially for SpaceX, for example, I thought, well, the genesis of SpaceX was not to create a company, but really how do we get NASA's budget to be bigger? That was initially the goal. So I came up with this little small philanthropic mission, which would be to send a small greenhouse to the surface of Mars. It's called Mars Oasis. And there would, upon landing, the seeds would be in dehydrated nutrient gel, hydrated upon landing, and you'd have this little greenhouse, and then the money shot would be, green plants against a red background. I think that would get people excited about, rekindles the spirit of Apollo, essentially. And as I got more and more into what it would take to do that, I learned that the fundamental issue is actually the cost of access to space. Rockets were super expensive, and the cost per pound or kilogram to orbit had actually gone up over the years, not down. And it was like, okay, well, it won't matter if we are able to do this philanthropic mission and it generates a lot of will to go to Mars. That's not going to matter if there's no way. So after my second or third trip back from Russia, I was like, whoa, there's got to be a way to build rockets. There's got to be a way to solve this rocket problem. I started reading a lot of books on rockets and did sort of a first principles analysis of of a rocket, just broke down the materials that are in a rocket, what would it cost to buy those materials, what versus the price of the rocket, and there's a gigantic difference between the raw material cost of the rocket and the finished cost of the rocket. So there must be something wrong happening in going from the constituent atoms to the final shape. And I found that certainly to be true. And then why weren't people trying to make reusability work? It was very difficult to make rocket reusability work. And then unfortunately the space shuttle ended up being a counterexample of don't try to make reusability work, because the space shuttle ended up costing more per flight than an expendable vehicle of equivalent capability. So for a long time, people were using the space shuttle as an example of why reusability is dumb. You can't take a single case example and make an entire theory out of it. So there's no question in my mind that if you could reuse the rockets, it has to be true reuse, which means rapid and complete reuse. The problem with the space shuttle is only a portion of the system came back. Like the big orange tank, which was also the primary airframe, was discarded every time, and the parts that were reused were incredibly difficult to refurbish. So the only kind of reuse that matters is if it's rapid and complete. So that the only thing you're changing between flights, apart from scheduled maintenance, is the propellant. So we embarked upon that journey to create SpaceX in 2002. And in the beginning, I wouldn't even let my friends invest because I didn't want to lose their money. I thought it was like, I'd rather lose my own money. So, and then we almost did die at SpaceX actually. So I budgeted for 3 flights. I mean, technically, I did have a plan where I had the money from PayPal. I had like about 180 million from PayPal. And I thought, I'll allocate half of that to SpaceX and Tesla and Solar City, and that should be fine. I'll have 90 million. Like, it's just lots, But then what happened is things cost more and took longer than I thought. So I had a choice of either put the rest of the money in or the companies are going to die. And it's like, so I ended up putting all the money in and borrowing money for rent from friends. 2008 was brutal. 2008 we had the 3rd consecutive failure of the Falcon 1 rocket for SpaceX. Tesla almost went bankrupt. We closed our financing round 6 p.m. Christmas Eve 2008. It was the last hour of the last day that it was possible. We would have gone bankrupt 2 days after Christmas otherwise. And I got divorced. That was like rough, man. Yeah, I mean, SpaceX is alive by the skin of its teeth, so is Tesla. If things had just gone a little bit the other way, both companies would be dead. And I had, like, one of the most difficult choices I've ever faced in life was in 2008. I think I had maybe $30 million left, or $30 or $40 million left in 2008. I had 2 choices. I could put it all into one company, and then the other company would definitely die, or split it between the 2 companies. But if I split it between the 2 companies, then both might die. When you put your blood, sweat, and tears into creating something, and building something, it's like a child. And so it's like, which one am I going to let one starve to death? I couldn't bring myself to do it, so I split the money between the 2. Fortunately, thank goodness, they both came through. Well, there's a ton of failures along the way, that's for sure. As I said, for SpaceX, the first 3 launches failed, and we're just barely able to scrape together enough parts and money to do the 4th launch. If that 4th launch had failed, we would have been dead. So multiple failures along the way. I tried very hard to get the right expertise in for SpaceX. I tried hard to find a great chief engineer for the rocket, but the good chief engineers wouldn't join, and the bad ones, well, there was no no point in hiring him. So I ended up being chief engineer of the rocket. So if I could have found somebody better, then we would have maybe had less than 3 failures. Yeah, I haven't had a business. I had a business plan way back in the Zip 2 days. But these things are just always wrong. So I just didn't bother with business plans after that. You know, wishful thinking for sure is a source of many problems in many walks of life. You know, business or personal, wishful thinking causes a lot of trouble. You really have to ask, you know, whether something is true or not. Does it make sense? If it ever feels like too easy, it probably is. You know, but for all the drama of SpaceX, I think Tesla's actually been probably 2/3 of my total drama dose over time. Tesla's a drama magnet. It's crazy. For business time, almost all of it is really dedicated to SpaceX and Tesla. It may sound like I've got a lot of different endeavors, but it's overwhelmingly SpaceX and Tesla in terms of time allocation. So it's, and then for non-business stuff, it's almost entirely kids. I think probably one of the biggest misunderstandings is that I'm actually not an investor. Sometimes people think I'm an investor or I invest in things. I don't invest in anything. In fact, the only public security that I own of any kind is Tesla. And then the next biggest is SpaceX. And then the Boring Company kind of started it more as a joke because that would be a funny name for a company. You know, we put the zero in Bring. It's not because of some epiphany that I had one day driving down the 405. That's how it gets translated somehow. I was talking about tunnels for years and years. For probably 5 years or 4 years at least, whenever I'd give a talk and people would ask me about what opportunities do you see in the world, I'd say tunnels. Can someone please build tunnels? So after 4 or 5 years of begging people to build tunnels, and still no tunnels, I was like, okay, I want to build a tunnel. So, so I was like basically talking people's ears off for tunnels for several years, and then said, well, let's find out what it takes to build a tunnel. And so I started digging a tunnel. I wanted to start the tunnel from where I could see it from my office at SpaceX. So I said, well, let's just carve off a part of the parking lot across the road so I can see if anything's happening or not.
From the air age, through the missile age, and into the age of space. Our space age heritage of knowledge is older than a decade, older than a century, older than a millennium. Our scientific knowledge has evolved through the ages concurrently with the minds of men. Our capacity to learn has expanded in the process. The challenging idea of exploring beyond our planetary boundaries is as old as history, probably as old as humanity itself. Concepts of the universe have changed, just as our knowledge of the Earth itself has changed. Compress the entire history of the Earth into 1 year. On this timescale, 8 months of the year would be devoid of life. During the succeeding 2 months, simple bacteria would come into existence. Mammals would not appear until the second week in December. Man would walk into the scene at 11:45 p.m. on December 31st. Recorded history would account for but the final ticks of the clock. Man's aerospace achievements, little more than the flicker of an eyelash. Hic deficit orbis. Here ends the world. So said an ancient map inscribed at the Pillars of Hercules. The two-dimensional world of early history was narrow, because man's knowledge of his environment was narrow. Ptolemy, for 1,000 years considered to be the greatest authority on astronomy, placed the Earth at the center of the universe. Copernicus, in 1543, advanced the idea that the sun was at the center of the planetary orbits, identified the Earth as one of these planets. Kepler, in the 17th century, described his 3 great laws of planetary motion, setting a pattern for the study of the solar system. Galileo, 17th century inventor of the telescope, who opened a new window to the skies with a device that could look at both sides of the present, using the antique light from distant stars to chart future voyages into space.
That is really impressive. The tactile feedback is tremendous.
Fingers, wiggle. All right, we're safe to take off.
Thank you. We're here. Very cool. Thank you. Very, very cool. Thank you.
Newton, who said of his 3rd law of motion, "This is the principle that will enable mankind in later centuries to undertake flights to the stars." Montgolfier, 2 brothers, sons of a papermaker from the little French town of Annonay, in 1783 achieved by balloon what the Wright brothers, the bicycle makers from Dayton, Ohio, did in 1903 in a strange new device called an aeroplane. And Goddard, who in 1926 launched a liquid-fueled rocket, and in 1935 sent a rocket 7,500 feet into the sky. Space is a place of knowledge and of progress. Space is the new psychological frontier. It provides us an emotional challenge. It stimulates our desires for knowledge and adventure. It increases our fears. It feeds our ambitions. Space is the new scientific frontier. The sky is no longer the limit. Human knowledge is doubling every decade, for ignorance is our enemy, just as surely as knowledge is power, power for good or power for evil. Man's judgment in the applications of technologies, particularly in the fertile fields of space, may well determine human destiny.
Over 175 fulfillment centers around the world and more than 500,000 employees, was ranked one of the 12 worst companies to work for by the National Center for Occupational Safety and Health.
Too much Kropotkin. I'm feeling leftist and icky. I need an aberrant oligarch with exorbitant wealth to own me.
There are certain laws of physics and certain things you need size for, and things need to be big.
Jeff. Dear Jeffy, Jeff, Mr. Bezos, owner of everything, I've been thinking about you for a while and getting excited, just like you do every time your sweatshop turns a profit. You earn my affections for you, just like you totally earned your $200 trillion net worth all by yourself and that hard work ethic you have.
Up here at a broken workstation that injured her back.
It felt like somebody stabbed me in the back and drug a knife all the way down.
I want you to exploit me like a factory worker. Cook me faster than same-day shipping and don't allow me to take a pee break afterwards. Devour me like a small business in rural Tennessee.
Hello, citizens of the world. You may know me as Jeff Bezos, founder of the most powerful company in the world. Amazon.
Everything you thought it would be.
Call it prime delivery, the culmination of a lifelong dream for Jeff Bezos, who reached space with his brother Mark, Dutch teenager Oliver Daemen, and 82-year-old veteran pilot Wally Funk.
So good.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
The crew thrilled by the sensation of weightlessness 66 miles above the Earth.
Blue Origin's first human flight, Godspeed, first crew of New Shepard. Let's light this candle.
Rocketing into the lower edge of space, the reusable New Shepard spacecraft pulled off a perfect landing in the West Texas desert.
Expectations were high, and they were dramatically exceeded.
Bezos earning his astronaut wings 21 years after founding Blue Origin. Trailblazing pilot Wally Funk, now the oldest person ever in space, but had to wait decades when NASA refused to send her to space.
I loved it. And I loved being here with all of you and your family and the four of us. We had a great time. It was wonderful. I want to go again fast.
Amid the celebrations, Bezos is facing backlash, though, for this comment.
I want to thank every Amazon employee and every Amazon customer, because you guys paid for all of this.
Bezos sold Amazon stock to fund Blue Origin, but Amazon has been criticized for underpaying workers and fighting against unions.
This was your dream, but for all those millions of Americans who are watching this, who are saying, this is a joyride, it has nothing to do with me. What did you experience that matters to all Americans?
We live on this beautiful planet. We need to take all heavy industry, all polluting industry, and move it into space, and keep Earth as this beautiful gem of a planet that it is.
Bezos recently stepped away from his role as CEO at Amazon. He says his Climate Change Foundation and Blue Origin will now become his primary focus. But how many people can afford the hundreds of thousands of dollars it costs to take the ride?
Got to do it the same way we did it with commercial airline travel. Really almost in the barnstormer phase. That's what we're doing right now. But you know where that barnstorming phase leads? To 787s. And that's what we have to do.
Yeah, remember the barnstorming phase was in the 19-teens, 1920s. They literally were flying by biplanes. Right now, he says that they have sold $100 million worth of tickets going forward. We don't know how much these tickets are going for. We do know one person paid $28 million in that charitable auction, and presumably he or she is flying pretty soon, guys. 2 more flights scheduled for this fall. Back to you.
Hey, Tom, you mentioned Bezos putting money into energy, fighting climate change. There was a lot of talk yesterday about the environmental impact of that launch. What do we know about that?
Yeah, I got a lot of questions also on Twitter about that. Listen, it's a liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen type of engine. So it burns pretty clean. Essentially what you saw coming out of the engine as it rocketed to space, that was really just water vapor. It's a pretty clean engine. Listen, if you have a lot of these types of engines actually out there and taking people to space, the question would be, what's the cumulative effect? But this particular flight and these engines are really pretty clean.
All right, Tom Costello for us once again from Van Horn, Texas. Tom, thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Find your favorite recipes, celebrity interviews, uplifting stories, shop our favorite deals, and so much more with the Today app. Download it now.
Hey guys, this is Tommy with Tommy Nation Politics. How's everyone doing today? Tommy Nation Politics.